You're listening to the 49 Carats podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Monday, November 18th, and I didn't know how to start this show because, I was like, should I go with the sigh? Should I go with the, kind of dramatic, monotone? Because that's where we're at with this season, right? And so me and my Monday co-host, Weston, going to talk about this latest loss from the 49ers, try to make sense of it a little bit, try to think about where this team is going, like going forward the rest of this season, what we think. And Weston, I'm not going to ask you how you're doing because I think I know. Rather, I'm just going to ask you, I'm not going to ask you anything. I'm just going to say hi.
Hello. Good to be here.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. I think I need this session as well as the listeners. I think, Sunday was just brought into perspective everything that we talked about in the offseason, leading to how the beginning of the season looked, and it just all kind of culminated yesterday afternoon. And it just feels like, I don't want to say right, because I don't ever talk to be right. I'd rather be wrong in a lot of these instances, but I think our gut feeling was confirmed that this season has that floundering effect. The excitement's just not there like it's been in years past. And throughout the show, I'm sure we'll talk about why it's okay and, where the positivities might lie. But that was a sobering punch to the gut yesterday afternoon. And I don't know if I've officially processed, B, officially comprehended, C, if I'm anything but unwell at the moment.
Yeah, unwell. Yes, definitely. And we're starting off the show with the super chat from Corey. Thank you, Corey. He says, if Kyle Shanahan's seat is hot next year, does he really tie his future to Purdy? Something tells me we're going to hear Niners interested in Cousins this offseason. Oh, God, we're starting the show off strong.
Let's do it.
Yeah, roll the sleeves up. Let's get into this. Well, Corey, I'm glad you didn't suggest that Kyle Shanahan's seat is hot this year, because based on some of the reactions I've seen from a lot of fans, it's scorching, right? But I don't think, in fact, it is right now. Obviously he got an extension before this season. That should tell you everything you need to know about what the 49ers feel about Kyle Shanahan, despite what happens this year. Now, if something similar happens next year, that you're possibly missing the playoffs, which, by the way, mathematically, the 49ers could still make the playoffs. So right now, we may not be as optimistic about it, right? I definitely am not, but mathematically, they still could. So right now, it still feels a little premature for the organization, I think, to make any sweeping judgments about what this season is. You got to wait till the end of the year. If they miss the playoffs this year, and let's say they miss it next year as well, ooh, yeah, I mean, that seat probably should be pretty hot at that point, I would think. Clearly, at that point, something's not working. But as far as tying the future to Purdy, I don't know. I feel like 49ers have some decisions they're going to have to make this offseason. I think they're going to want to kick the can down the road as much as they can if they can help it. Now we've seen how players can, try to leverage the situations as much as they can. Maybe Purdy refuses to show up to OTAs, or I don't know. I don't see Purdy being that kind of guy, but you never know once we get into contract negotiations what his agency is maybe advising him to do. We don't know. Anyway, I think I think the 49ers will sign Purdy to an extension, whether it's the best thing for the team for Kyle Shanahan or not, just because I can't see them moving off of him. I think they would be afraid to. For a couple of reasons, and maybe that's a conversation for another day. I don't want to have a long-winded answer, and I want to give Weston a chance to give his thoughts as well. But yeah, if they do tie Kyle Shanahan's future to Purdy, that could eventually be to Shanahan's detriment, right? Like, so that's just be the risk they'd be willing to take.
Yeah, I start with the last line of course, statement following his question. I think even if Brock Purdy had an all-pro caliber season, just the mere fact that Kirk Cousins might be a free agent at the end of the season, or things aren't going swimmingly in Atlanta, like Kyle Shanahan will forever be tied to him, just like Tom Brady was forever tied to the San Francisco 49ers, had his Patriot career run dry. I think the 49ers are just quarterback controversy just is ingrained in this culture, especially over the last few years. But I will say, I do not think that Kyle Shanahan is tied to Brock Purdy in any capacity. So, like, if you really look at it, they brought over Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy had 5 good games. They turn around, make him the highest paid quarterback, like in the NFL, almost essentially, right? Like overnight with nothing to prove. They walked away eventually, right? Like they got away from that no harm, no foul. Trey Lance, a lot was invested into the future of that young man in terms of draft capital, etc. They quickly cut ties with that. Again, no harm, no foul. So I think he's very risk adverse to whoever the quarterback is, and winning ways will do that, right? For him. So I just don't ever think like, and which is, I think it was a great point by Corey, or a great question, because a lot of organizations and coaches tend to be tied to that franchise quarterback. And even if you make the mistake and pay Brock, and he's not worth, when I say make the mistake, if he becomes not worth the money that you have invested and doesn't yield you the results, still don't think, I think their fates are tied, are separate from one another, especially given the fact that like Brock Purdy was a 7th round draft pick and kind of fell into their lap. It's not, oh my God, this is the 3rd time we've invested a ton into a quarterback and it didn't pan out. Like the investment here will be more fiscal than it will be anything else if they could. And just don't forget, like he still is, like they could play some games here. I don't advise it. I advise being very transparent. Even if it's, hey, we don't think you're 65 million. This is what we think you are. I think the more they share that with Brock's camp, the better somebody like Brock feels about it, if that's the case. But they could play shenanigans and play a game of chicken if they want to, because he is, right? He still would be under contract for another year under the rookie contract. This would be his 3rd season. No, am I wrong? No, this would be his third season. It's a 4-year contract. They could play a very dangerous game if they really wanted to.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll see how it shakes out. We've been saying all season how this season is kind of going to shape the final maybe or range that this team will be willing to pay Brock Purdy, right?
Yep.
And so it's fluctuated quite a bit as this season has gone on, and I think the remaining games, that being kind of like, the gauntlet, you could say, is probably going to tell us even more, especially within the context of missing guys. I think you're able to see a lot more about what Brock Purdy is or isn't right now, right? And I think that's good for the team to have as much information as possible before, they ultimately make this decision. And while we're talking about Brock Purdy, right? Like KJ in the comments says, shake it up and let Dobbs cook for a game. Give Purdy a mental rest break. Well, I thought it was interesting that today, not too long ago before we went live, Kyle Shanahan did give us some injury updates, and Brock Purdy was on the list, actually. Didn't mention anything for him yesterday, but he was feeling some soreness today. Shoulder soreness, right shoulder soreness, so he's throwing arm. He's going to be day-to-day this week. So that was interesting. I guess we'll see what happens there. I would expect he still plays. But this is interesting to me, Weston, just because, and I'm not suggesting that the team is doing this, but if at any point you're like, okay, the season is cooked, like let's just try to mix it up. Like you have that excuse, right? Of, it's his shoulder. But again, I'm not saying that the team is doing that or is going to do that. I'm just saying that's
No, I think
wouldn't
you're
be
right.
the first or last time we've seen a team do that.
Exactly, right? I mean, hey, the injury report's the best way to hedge your bet. And he did take a couple hits yesterday, a lot of due to his own scrambling, right? And even the diving head first and the things that he does, like the impact is usually head, neck, shoulder, right? Like that's the way that it goes. So not surprised to see that at all. I really do not believe that there is any scenario where they're just like, Brock, you get a mental break, especially when you're about to seriously consider the money. Like, hey, how do you handle adversity? How do you handle the fact that, like, maybe George Kittle isn't playing for a little while? Debo's been super ineffective, Like, how do you just handle these things? Because this is not what the roster is going to look like in 25 when we're entrusting you to alleviate everyone around you, not them alleviate you, or elevate is the word that I really want to, like not having your team prop you up. Like, it's time for you to pick them up. And I just don't think that's the signal that this team cares to send, in the sense of like, we're going to mail this in so much to the fact that we're just going to sit the quarterback, for the second half of the season, when you still are mathematically in consideration for the playoffs, that 16 out of 32 teams would covet, where they're sitting right now. It's just not up to snuff for us because we have been spoiled as of late, i.e. 3 consecutive NFC championship games, right? A Super Bowl appearance. Like, it's all relative, but I just don't envision there's a scenario ever, unless he is truly banged up, right? Where it doesn't make sense to push beyond it. If it's just a little shoulder soreness and well, that's kind of par for the course when you're, week 11 in the NFL.
Yeah, and as pointed out, like if this is a time where they are trying to determine whether or not he is that guy, how much you should pay him, you do want him to play these games. So yeah, that's a good point by Corey, and I agree with that. So I want to clarify that stance as well. Now, just to read off for the audio listeners, the rest of the injury updates from Kyle Shanahan: Nick Bosa with the hip and oblique. Yesterday on the show, on the post game, I think I did mention, I thought it was a re-aggravation of the hip injury that he came in with. In fact, it's not. He hurt the other side, and it's his oblique on the other side. So dealing with 2 injuries on both sides of his body that are, pretty painful, and he'll be evaluated throughout the week. So we'll see if Bosa plays on Sunday. It seems like it's truly 50-50 for his chances. So rest is going to be key this week, and I wouldn't expect him to practice much, if at all, this week. So just keep an eye on that. Jacob Cowing, who exited the game, he's in concussion protocol. Linebacker Tatum Bethune, he's going to be out for a while with, I believe, an MCL sprain. George Kittle, who missed this game, expected to practice Wednesday. So that is good news, because, boy, did the team miss him. And Dre Greenlaw, they hope to open his practice window next week. So we'll see on that, because I think that's interesting too. If 49ers lose against the Packers, like, do you even want to open Dre Greenlaw's practice window? Would Greenlaw even want his practice window open? Like, would he want to come back? I'm sure he's itching to play, but he's a free agent after the season. So it's like, you got to think long term, right? So it'll be interesting what the 49ers do, but that hasn't happened yet. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But going back to George Kittle, even with the injury designation he had going into it, he practiced in limited fashion last week. So I was actually shocked by the fact that, Saturday you see the reports that he's unlikely to play. And I was actually thinking this game against Seattle was going to be a good spot for him, right? Like, all signs point to that. I was like, he's probably gonna get a touchdown in this one. And, obviously him being out hurt the offense, but it's not like the offense has been on fire this season. So not sure how much of a difference it made. It just made it look a little more discombobulated than usual. You got Jalen Moore coming in for, a few snaps to be that jumbo tight end, coming in as a 6th offensive lineman. That was interesting. And then I don't know if I saw Braden Willis, get any snaps in this game, which I was a little surprised by. But he is kind of prone to some penalties, so maybe that was a reason. The 49ers got penalties anyway, and Eric Sauber, just doesn't obviously isn't George Kittle. So I just feel like when Kittle's not out there, it's obvious, and you're already having struggles with your offense. It just made it that much more worse.
Yeah, listen, we all talk about it. George Kittle is very integral to what this team does and what they want to do and how they want to own the line of scrimmage, make everything look like, every play looks similar and then hit you with the play action. And he's a big part of that game as well, too. I think, listen, it was probably, hey, he was banged up. He practiced all week. Hey, let's give this a go. Let's look at it, pre-game. It's a home game, so you get the benefit of he doesn't have to travel. Let's see how it goes. And I think you just kind of, weigh the cost benefit, especially when you look at, okay, what are the next 3 games on the schedule? It's, Seattle, you've already beat them. You don't feel good. They've lost how many in a row coming into this game and have not looked all that great, followed by Green Bay, Buffalo on the road. Well, Jesus, I'd really, if the risk reward was sit George this week, feel really confident barring another injury in one of these games, you have them for those 2 games. I think you do that 100 out of 100 times, if that's the question or the dilemma that they were faced with when testing is okay, if he aggravates that hamstring further, it's not just a single game missed, right? It's 3, done. 4, 5 weeks. And that, we're already sitting here saying we're cooked at 5-5. How do you think that feels at 5-7? That's not good.
And look, I understand that there's now at this point a very small percentage of the fan base that is still holding out some hope. And look, I'm not going to make them feel bad, right? I talked about it, last week. People fan how they want to fan, and they fan how they are in life. If you're positive, you're going to be an optimistic fan. If you're negative, you're going to be a negative fan. That is just who you are. You can't really change that about yourself. So I don't want to make people feel bad about what side they're leaning on about this team. But for the people, go for it.
I was saying just about that point, for those who might be listening right now or play this back and feel that they are the overly optimistic fan and want reason for hope. I am too, right? Steph, I make no bones about that.
Sometimes you're grasping for something to be hopeful
Of course,
about.
Even though my brain and what I see and what I interpret tells me I refuse to watch my San Francisco 49ers in any other light than utter optimism that they can win a football game, right? We've seen the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not saying this version of the San Francisco 49ers, but you have seen the San Francisco 49ers go on an 8, 9, 10 game tear. It's possible. It's unlikely with this group. There is nothing in the previous 10 games that gives you there's no evidence that it becomes likely that they can go on this run. But there have been bigger Cinderella stories by less talented teams across all professional sports. And even though I will sit here and tell you about this is poor, this needs to improve, this is what I would do in those scenarios, I still turn on that game and I cheer as if I expect them to win regardless if I do or don't, because that's what I latch onto, right? So I think those overly optimistic fans, I am you, you are me, we are one. That is how I go about it, regardless of who you might hear me crap on or poo-poo on throughout the week, talking about these games. But, don't give up. It's still there, it's not all lost. But Steph, me, that's just how I go about watching this team. Sunday's what I have to look forward to, right? We work during the week. We have families, we have regular stresses. Even though that's a different level of stress for 3.5 hours, it's my stress that I own, and I will never change that. I haven't in 35 years, and this team has handed out some real shit burgers before, right? Sorry for my language, but still been there for it.
Yeah, and I think that even with me maybe having soured a bit on this season. Like, I was watching the game, these last 2 games of the Niners, like the Bucs game that came down to the wire, this game that came down to the wire. Like, my heart is racing at the end. And that's with me, like, knowing kind of what was going to happen and like preparing myself for it. You know, like I'm still very much emotionally invested in this team. That doesn't change. But the reason that I think a lot of fans at this point have a hard time, you know, grasping at any sense of hope is because it feels different this time than it did all those other times. And I know when people point out, like, you know, in 2021, there were also, was it like 1-3 in the division or something like that? And, you know, they came back and they made the playoffs and all this, you know, just get to the dance. And it's true in the NFC West, like there are 3 teams that are 5-5 right now. So that there is still some life there, believe it or not. But here's where I feel differently. The fact that they're behind as far as the tiebreakers in the NFC West, that kind of feels like 2 steps back right there, right?
Oh.
It's not just, you're not just 1 game behind. You're actually 2 because you have to be an extra game over that team in order to be ahead of them on the standings. Also, 49ers have yet to beat a team over 500 this season. They're 1-5 against teams at or above 500, and they're 0-3 against teams with winning records. I don't have to tell you guys that they have a lot of teams with winning records coming up on the schedule. So I think that's why a lot of us don't feel very good about this team right now. The previous 2 wins against the Cowboys and the Bucs, they didn't look good, but they were getting the wins anyway. That meant something, right?
Yeah.
They were close to getting the win against the Seahawks, and that would have given me some hope. That would have given a lot of people some hope because they needed that. They needed that so bad.
Yeah.
Seahawks knew they needed that. So yeah, I mean, with them having lost that game, that's why, to me, it just feels like it's not officially over. Like I said, mathematically, not out of it. It just feels like it might as well be, because I think I know what happens next, just based on what I've seen so far from this team. Disappointing. There isn't any, I hate to say this, there's just no glimpse of a good team that I've seen on any side of the ball.
Yeah.
At all. At all.
I just think it's collectively. I think week to week we spend, it was the offense was poor, or the defense was poor, or the special teams. Let's just call it what it is through 10 games of the season. It's everything and it's nothing. It's like something you just can't put your finger on as to what's gone wrong. And Steph, let's go all the way back to post Super Bowl. When you and I did our first Monday show following the Super Bowl, it wasn't even excitement to get to the next season, right? Like, can't wait. It just all felt wrong from jump. And I think what we are truly witnessing is truly the Super Bowl hangover, the way that it was defined and meant to be, is like, hey, you have a similar roster. Yeah, you had some injuries. Yeah, you had some shakeup, but this should look good again. And it just does look wrong. And all the things and all the reasons why you felt like this was the one they had to win. The aging roster, right? The expiring contracts. Like, you knew the team was never going to look the same. But the truth is they played a lot of friggin' football over the last 4 seasons. Like, no true real offseason. Like, we were talking about Dre Greenlaw before. Honestly, right now, I don't care if they beat Green Bay. Like, shut it down. Shut it down. Give this guy a full year off of football to recover from a torn Achilles that he did it on that. Nick Bosa, shut it down. Just shut it down. These guys, Dre Greenlaw, depending upon how it is, coming off that injury, you might find a way to bring him back. Bosa's on contract. Like McCaffrey, you're entering 10 weeks into the season. It's going to take another 2 or 3 weeks to get the legs under you and probably look in any shape or form what it looked like before. Maybe you shut it down and you give it to Mason and Guerrero. And if they catch fire or catch lightning in a bottle, let them, right? Like, let them. That means the team's fighting, play their way. Honestly, right now, with the way that this team is playing, they are not better with aging vets on the field. I think they're actually worse.
Oof. Yeah, it certainly feels that way. And this comment from Corey, it isn't over, but I think we're going to see something we haven't seen the past 5 years. Core players giving up. They're clearly mentally and physically exhausted from last season. I think it's true. I mean, I didn't want to think that this would be a thing. I didn't want to think that Super Bowl hangover is real, but it's not just one Super Bowl hangover. It's that plus the many years you've been going at this and with the same group. And, I say it a lot too, like insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. You have run it back how many times with like a lot of these vets, right? And now I think you're starting to see the effects on some of them and how it's not quite looking like it used to. Deebo Samuel, I don't know what's going on with Deebo Samuel, but that just does not look like the same guy from even last year. Obviously not the same guy from 2021. We know that. That was never going to happen again. That was an outlier of a season.
That guy was different.
You're not going to replicate a season like that.
Totally.
Maybe ever. But even still, like even from last season, it's a huge difference for what we're seeing so far. I mean, I think from the vets, like George Kittle might be the only guy that looks like he's the same. And, he's now dealing with a hamstring injury. So hopefully we see that same guy when he's back, hopefully on Sunday. Christian McCaffrey coming back from this Achilles tendonitis. I didn't want to believe that McCaffrey would look different when he came back because I think I always see him as like the same guy. Like when he practices, he's like always 100%, always 110%. But something looks off with him too. Like he just doesn't look like the same guy. I don't know if it's hesitancy physically or hesitancy, mentally, but there's something there. He hasn't been as efficient as we're used to seeing him. That's been an issue. And along with that, you have Kyle Shanahan trying it over and over and over again. What did I say insanity was? Yeah. Jordan Mason got 2 carries, positive carries, by the way, and we didn't see him after those 2 carries. It was just very bizarre. And so, I think we got to be willing to mix some things up, right? I mean, you got some youth on this team. Some of that youth is looking pretty good. So maybe going forward, just lean into that. Like if I'm not watching this game with the belief that, this team is going to make the playoffs and they're going to be contenders, which I'm not, like, I'm not doing that anymore. I want to watch this team from the perspective of, well, they got a lot of young players that look like they'll have bright futures with this team, players that look like they're going to be foundational pieces in 2025 that are going to be starting in 2025. They're going to be your cornerstone, going forward that you're going to retool with, right? That's exciting, right? There's some excitement in that. So, that's kind of where I want to shift my focus to. And I don't want to be negative. Like I think there's some acceptance that needs to happen. I think I've reached that point. You guys know. But when the rest of you are ready to join me, we'll be here and talking about some of these young players, these rookies who look good. Juwan Jennings, who looks good. I mean, come on. I want to find something good.
Listen, I am all for this. I said it before. I think the team is worse right now with the veterans playing because there's just a different mentality. They right now are playing with something to lose, like a year off their career, like another year without a Super Bowl. Like the rooks, the second-year players, the third-year players, the guys you pulled off the scrap heap, get them in there. Let them go play. I don't think the signal you want to send is we're throwing in the towel. I think let's use this as what it is, an opportunity to, why you are still quote unquote in a playoff hunt, get your younger players viable and valuable reps in game scenarios against a very tough back half schedule. Like what's gonna to your point, looking for the future. I think what fans, or at least what I want selfishly, is show me that you've been preparing for this transition, and then the offseason needs to become more of a retool versus a rebuild. Because if it's a retool, great. You still have a lot of promising pieces on this roster that will be under contract. Demo just got handled, right? There's still people there. Some of them are going to be vets that you get another year or two out. So if you can rest those legs and just get them a mental refresh or whatever. Brock Purdy's not included in this. He doesn't get a mental refresh. He plays the most important position. But if you can get Christian off his feet a little bit, let Bosa actually recover, rest Kittle, for Christ's sake, can we even get Fred Warner off the field for a couple snaps just to conserve what these guys do? They're still part of this team. They are still part of the go forward. But what do all the other pieces around them look like? I want to see that. While we all know that the Trey Lance trade really hurt us because he's not here, and those were viable picks, at least collateral given up, that could maybe help in this transition. Did this year's draft class? I believe it did. I think you believe it did. I think a lot of people believe it did. How much is that going to help in that transition? Again, I use the cliche terms of retool versus rebuild. While I am not overly optimistic about the remainder of this season, I think if this is handled correctly, and that's a coaching thing, that's an internal conversation thing, that's a off the field sort of thing. If it is handled correctly, I'm not being naive. I think there's a lot to look forward to in 2025 and beyond. And part of that is new faces, right? That can fit where some of the old faces might be, because 11 weeks of the NFL season, 10 games played, the old faces aren't getting it done.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that, the 49ers didn't make any big moves at the trade deadline, one is because you still didn't know what this team was at that point, and you didn't want to give up too much for what could be a lost season, right? A non-contending season. So I think the 49ers did the right move. I only say that because, I saw a lot of people yesterday saying, gee, it would have been nice if the 49ers brought in a pass rusher. Well, you bring in a pass rusher for what? I mean, this team isn't one pass rusher away from contending for anything. So you pick someone up at the trade deadline, you give up maybe a day two, pick for that player, and you're kind of back to square one as far as your defense, your team. And you also are missing a day two pick that you really need in 2025. So I'm okay with the 49ers, not making any big moves at the trade deadline. I think the moves they made were fine. They needed depth, but I think part of that was their kind of awareness and knowing that they need to retool. And 2024 was the first step in that, right? And 2025 is going to be a big step into that, right? So yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to see some changes. And I want to address this comment too from Z. He says that's BS. The Chiefs have been in postseason every year too, and their grinding wins out. And that's very true. It is admirable what the Chiefs are doing in that sense, and they haven't always looked great doing it either. The last two seasons, it feels like they're scraping by, and yet they still get wins. I'll compare it to this. A horse that you're dangling a carrot in front of. The horse has gotten a carrot. He's tasted it. He knows what it feels like. He likes that feeling. He wants to keep going for it. The horse that hasn't gotten a bite of that carrot, it's going to get tired after a while. It's not going to be the same. So that's the difference between what the Chiefs have done, who have won 2 Super Bowls in the span that the 49ers have been trying to get one and haven't. So that's the difference between, these teams right now. It's demoralizing what the 49ers have been through. And when you're doing it with the same group of guys, I mean, that gets pretty difficult. So
your word choice, I think, is so spot on. Demoralizing. Steph, let's call it what it is. I'm demoralized just sitting here and I'm just watching the team. Right. The hardest thing I do is get my game day attire on Sunday and and make sure I'm in front of the TV, missing a couple family commitments. Imagine what it feels like for the ones that are, putting all the blood, sweat, and tears in and working their tails off to be the best in the business and be that highly competitive. And I know we pointed out the Chiefs, but I would say that's the only franchise over the last few years that's doing it in that manner, right? So there's 31 other teams in the NFL who are trying to figure out that level of consistency. And there'll be, look at 49ers had 2019 soared to ascending heights, right? 2020, we know what 2020 was. Then 2021, 2022, 2023, right? Like a 3-year run, like it's almost like a quick factory reset on the iPhone, and then it's going to be up and running again. Like that's what we need to do a little bit here. But I choose to remain optimistic as to what can be. But I think 2025 presents a great opportunity and for the 49ers to really try and find 2 or 3 more impact players in the draft that can contribute right away. Perhaps be, when you have the roster shedding that you're going to inevitably have in 2024, be aggressive around, some new faces. Like there's still plenty of people. I don't care what anybody says. There's still plenty of guys in this league that would love to play for Kyle Shanahan. It's just, they all talk with one another. They know he's that guy. Like I'm actually kind of sick of the Kyle slander, and we could say that for another day. I don't want to take us down a path we'll never recover from, but like, he's still that guy. Like, and he's not on the hot seat. He's not gonna be on the hot seat. Like, he's not. I think the organization loves him, and I think there's got to be a point that we always look for somebody to blame. And yesterday was no different. I saw moments where I'm like, Kyle, why? Kyle, why? Kyle, why? And we could talk about those individually, but at the end of the day, like we talk about, it's execution. The players still got to do it. Like, just because they don't execute it doesn't mean it was the wrong play called. Yeah. Like the plays are dialed up. They're there. Just that everything is out of sync. Like the players are not executing. They're not finishing. Therefore, we're going to say coaching is out of sync. Like it's just been a shit show since February 12th, 2024 to this point here.
Yeah. And look, it's not like we're just because we don't want Kyle to be fired does not mean that we will defend every single move he makes. And we've said it on this show. We have critiqued Kyle Shanahan on this show. But I think there's nuance in that. You should be able to critique someone without wanting them to be fired, without I don't feel like that would be the right move at this time to fire Kyle Shanahan. And I think partially because the players do have to execute. When you hear Kyle Shanahan talk about why this team lost, why they deal with penalties and all that, it sounds like a coach that expects his guys who are veterans. What have we been talking about for the last 10 minutes? These are veterans, right? Yeah. These guys have been with the team. These guys, Kyle Shanahan has taught everything, not everything they know, but a lot of what they know and how they're supposed to execute, right? So when you hear him talk about those mistakes, it's like he expects them to do it correctly. It's not happening, right? And when it's a few times, that falls on the player. But when it's a pattern, and I would say at this point, it's becoming so much of a thing this season that it does fall on Kyle, right? Like, So that's kind of my thing. Yes, it does fall on the players as far as execution goes. They are the ones on the field who make the plays. But Kyle Shanahan, I need you to understand that whatever worked before, clearly not working now. So like there needs to be some kind of revisiting of certain things to get the point back in some of these guys' heads of like, hey, I need you guys to be on your P's and Q's and execute the way I know you can, the way you're supposed to, because that's why ultimately this team is not winning games. It comes down to penalties. It comes down to offensive linemen missing blocks. And that's why Christian McCaffrey can't even get a single yard against the Seahawks, right? It comes down to Brock Purdy, throwing in rhythm, in timing. Like there's a lot of times this season where the timing of Brock Purdy's throws just hasn't been like
what you've seen in the past.
Last year was just like boom, 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 drop, pass, timing perfect. Even if he waited in the pocket a little bit, the timing would be perfect, hitting someone in stride. We're just not seeing that this season. It's been very drop back. And that's why we're seeing Purdy run as much as he has, because he's not seeing those guys that are open. And if he does see them, he moves off of them, or he thinks about it just a second too long, and before you know it, they're not open anymore. He is not taking checkdowns at times. So there's just a lot going on. There's a lot, and it's coming down to execution. And a lot of that, I get it. It funnels up to Kyle Shanahan. So everyone has some blame to take, right? I've taken, not offense, but like I've seen a lot of people like blaming the defense for the loss, and because there was a bit of a fourth quarter collapse, right? But let's not forget the defense had a fourth down stop without Nick Bosa on the field, mind you. Mm-hmm. That was huge. Basically handed the offense the rest of the game on a platter. Here, offense, all you have to do is control the clock, get a first down or two. We win this game. The offense couldn't even they got 21 yards. Yep. That's it. You couldn't even get close enough for a field goal. You got 21 yards. 5 of those yards came from a Seahawks penalty. So it's everyone. It's everyone on this team has responsibility in what this team has looked like this season. And I don't think there's any easy fix, but I think the best thing to do is start a kind of clean slate in the off season, man. I mean, that's really the only thing I can think of. And I'm not saying fire Kyle Shanahan. I'm just saying kind of what we've been suggesting. Let's bring some new blood in here, some youth, right? Someone who hasn't heard the message before, because clearly it's falling on deaf ears now. And we talk about the physical, mental, emotional toll it's taken on some of these players to do this over and over again. So I don't know, some changes I think are needed.
Yeah, I just think you need some players in some positions, and they don't have to be the talent that this team has on the roster is exceptional, right? It's not the norm for NFL teams, like the all pros at the levels that they've been, etc. So I'm not saying you just replace one all pro talent with another. This is not Madden, right? This is the real world. But people who aren't even jaded from what these losses have done to these prominent losses in big time moments and not getting to the mountaintop, you just need somebody that hasn't been hit by that bug, who's young, willing, able, fast, need to bring speed back here, need to bring physicality back here, all the things that were staples, like a lot of these guys on this roster outside of a Trent or a McCaffrey were homegrown too to get to where they were under this regime, right? Like they were found in drafts and were grown. Like we need that little surge, that rejuvenation here go forward. And we've said it multiple times. I think 2024 was the start, at least when I go down the rookie class and see immediate contribution from some of these folks that's paying dividends. I think that's a big deal going into next year. And I think we're saying the same thing. We want to see more of that for the next against good competition. That's the most important thing. You're not playing them in week 18 when doesn't matter if you win or lose and has zero effect on your playoff seeding. Guys, playoffs are right there. Say what you want. We do control our own destiny, right? That's the conversation. I'm just going to trust that I want to do it with you guys right now. That's, and that's what I want to see. And that's at least going into the Green Bay game. I'm optimistic that maybe we'll see some of that. I might change my tune when everybody else trots out there and I see Debo getting 60 reps, but 7 targets and only giving me 21 total yards in a game and can't get outside on a jet sweep anymore these days. Like if I'm seeing the same old song and dance, your definition of insanity, that's when my frustration will like boil over at that point.
Yep. Well, speaking
I'm
of,
just looking at the time.
yeah, I know. I think we've beat a dead horse, right? Like we'll continue to talk about, the state of the 49ers this week. But it is the player of the week show, and maybe we were avoiding this, Weston, to a certain degree. Because this is a short list.
Yeah, I was avoiding the embarrassment of saying that I only have one person on my list based off of that game and my emotion and feeling. Like I could say some other players, but there's really only one person in my eyes who's deserving of this week's award.
Yeah, I did have a second name on the list too.
Lead with your second.
Okay.
So we can share the first.
All right, sure. I'll lead with the second, and it was Dominic Pooney. I still think he's one of the bright spots on this team. 36 pass blocking opportunities yesterday against the Seahawks. Still no sacks allowed this season. No quarterback hits yesterday. 81.6 pass blocking grade on PFF. That was the highest on the team. And yeah, I mean, it's just what he's done has been impressive. It's been the model of consistency. And we talk about youth and changing some things up in 2025. I want more players like Dominic Pooney on my team, on this offensive line. I think he's going to be the standard, going forward. So definitely want to, nominate him for that.
Yeah, I mean he's been steady Eddie all season and beyond that, right? It's not just his consistency, it's his consistency at being honestly the best offensive lineman on the team right now. Like even Trent Williams is not the Trent Williams that we know. Like this is the guy, and he is clearly part of this future. And another resounding example of what we're talking about, where 2024 was an excellent head start into the changing of the guard and the youth movement that this team needs to see. I said it when they drafted him. Admittedly, I was like, I could tell you all day about the Florida State guys. Some of the ACC players didn't have a lot of my own eyes on Pooney coming into the season, but gosh, what a surprise he has been. At least for me. Others are not as surprised. They saw this coming, but he looks like every bit of a perennial Pro Bowler, if not all pro, and probably is going to be in the National Football League for 10 years. I just hope that's with the San Francisco 49ers.
I hope so too, and I don't see why not. But who's your one nominee for this week that I undoubtedly have on my list too? I think we all do.
It's Jawan Jennings. I mean, this guy, when you talk about just doing it the way that he does it, right? And I know we last week, I think we were talking about his Euro step and the things that he does, but the dude is just guts, right? Like he is just mad dogging people out there. And I think the play that epitomizes Jawan Jennings is there was a third down I think earlier in the fourth quarter. I think it was on their TD the possession where he had the TD, where literally Greg Olsen and the announcer are talking about third down, just like they're like circling Jawan Jennings at the top of their screen, and they hit him 4 yards short of the first down with four guys on him, and he still single-handedly goes and gets the first down and keeps that drive going. Like he is a dog. He got paid in the offseason. You always worry, paid for him, operatively speaking, compared to his receiver counterparts. This entire season, he's been the best wide receiver on the San Francisco 49ers. He was arguably the best player on the entire football field yesterday for both teams. If you want my honest opinion, really, really excited that he is part of the future and continues to outperform his contract, which is seldom happens in the National Football League. He was he was 10 for 91 yards, a touchdown. So usually he's when we say third and Jawan, but again, it's like third and 15, and they just find him. Like the dude's just a freaking magnet on third down. You can't even make it up. He's just he's one of the few pieces that have kept me excited all year because it's a lot of fun just to watch him play football. And then it's not just because he gives us good content of his goofy first Euro step and how he run and his long arms everywhere. Like, he's been lanky since college. I'm a Tennessee fan, so I have to follow him. But just he's been an absolute pleasure. And I think he's another one where you just realize how many riches this team. This guy was, you know what I mean? Like 2 targets a game for the last 2 seasons. And then all of a sudden, and they were all on third down, right? But he showed us in the Super Bowl what he was capable of, and it has continued since that game.
Yeah, and the live chat's having a side discussion here that apparently they're hearing some popping from our microphones. I don't hear any popping, so I don't think it's our microphones. It might be StreamYard, or YouTube. Not sure, but apologies for that.
No.
Yeah, Steve, I take accountability for the popping.
Maybe it was just because I was going crazy.
Yeah,
over
I mean,
Juwan
you were popping, my friend, in a good way. Juwan Jennings, 11 targets. He caught 10 of those. 7 of those accounted for first downs, including 3 on the drive he scored on. Right, 91 yards. 25% of those came after the catch. He's everything. He's everything. He feels like he's at times the only guy that's like willing this team to move the ball on offense, and I love that about him. I hate the fact that his best performances have come in losses.
No.
Like, oh my God, somebody please get a win for Juwan Jennings. Like, my God, last 2 games, 21 targets, 17 catches, 184 receiving yards, a touchdown, 12 first downs, 6 missed tackles forced. He's on pace for 1,100 yards receiving this season. Undoubtedly worth every penny that the 49ers gave him this offseason, maybe even underpaid. Like, it's just crazy how quickly he came on to being this guy. And I feel like Kyle said, yeah, we always thought he was this, right? Like, we knew this about Juwan Jennings. Like, oh my God, like, why does it take an injury to get him this involved? Like, find a way to get Juwan Jennings the ball, and then find a way to win a game that he puts forth this type of effort, because it needs to be rewarded, right? And man, I think this one's going to be a pretty easy vote. What do you guys think? And some of you, I think, we're already giving your thoughts. We're just going to go ahead and get the voting started now for this Week 11 game. We got Juwan Jennings. We got Dominic Pooney. I think I know where this is going. But, Weston, do you have any flowers you want to give out?
I guess I'll sprinkle a little out for Devondre Campbell. He has been stacking better games.
Wait, what?
Yeah. No?
Devondre Campbell?
Yeah. I thought he actually played well. Yeah. I thought he actually played well.
All right. Well, let me hear the case. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's not a compelling one. It's just what my eyes showed me. Is I of all people was super critical of this man throughout the entire season, and I think he stacked a couple good games in a row. What do you have, like 7 tackles? He's never going to do much in the passing game or pressure game, and I just think his bad moments as of late I'll put on coaching, where they've just like left him out on islands where he's just not a capable man. And I would love to see more of D Winters, actually covering some people. But I think he's been better at tackling. I thought he tackled well yesterday. It's hard when nobody else around him is like, I'm not poo-pooing the defense. I thought the defense collectively did everything that we could ask them to do, especially once your best player is off the field due to injury. But yeah, I'm shedding a little love for Devondre Campbell, somebody that I was so highly critical of all year long. I think he has played better, but his time should come to an end as well, while I say that.
Okay. Yeah. So was it against the Bucs or the Cowboys? One of those games I was like, that was one of his better games of the season, so I did give him flowers not too long ago.
Yeah.
I thought he was okay in this game, right? Like, there were times he had opportunities to tackle, he made the tackle, but in my mind, I'm just like, that's bare minimum stuff. Like that. Thank you for doing your job, Devondre Campbell. And maybe that's where we're at, right, Weston, with him. That it's like, I'm gonna give you flowers for doing your job because it seemed like you refused to do it all those other weeks. But
I think it's the comparison is all relative. Tell me who yesterday was better than okay. Not many, right?
That's fair. I mean, yeah, sure. That's fair. Yeah, we're slim pickings on the
it's a loss.
On the flowers.
We're not happy people,
Well, I'm kind of glad that you mentioned D. Winters because that's who I want to give flowers to. D. Winters, 10 snaps, only 10 snaps in that game, but he had 2 plays that especially stuck out to me. Early in the game, guarding DK Metcalf downfield, defending that well. That's difficult to do.
Yeah.
Very difficult. That is like a top 10 receiver in the league, and you are, taking him upfield with you, stuck with him. That was impressive. Then he was huge on the 4th down stop that the defense got. Him and Jair Brown were both in on that one. I mean, without him on that play, the Seahawks probably convert that.
Sure.
So, dude, 10 snaps and 2 that stuck out to me, like, you need more snaps.
100%.
Right? So, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think D. Winters deserves more opportunity. We're talking about, if the second half of the season needs to be a youth movement, right? I want D. Winters on the field. I want to see his athleticism out there, and I think it would benefit the 49ers quite a bit. It definitely would have benefited them, in that final Seattle drive where Geno Smith was tucking and running.
Your point about D. Winters, I want to come full circle on that. What we've basically been talking about this youth movement. The 49ers are at a point where they are in the season where the decision should be who gives me the maximum ceiling, not the maximum floor, right? Like, you already know what Devondre Campbell is. You thought you were going to bring him in here to plug a hole for this until you got Dre Greenlaw back and had a veteran presence on the football field. Didn't happen. So now let's go with the guy that let's just see what he got. It's like what he's got. Thrust him into 50, 60 snaps defensively. It's hard to get rhythm in the NFL when you play 10 snaps. Like, very few players aspire to be spot players. They're all preparing and trying to be the starter. I think about that with running backs, like running back by committee. I've never been a big fan of that because running back, if anything, is a position where it's just like you need to get into the doldrums of the game, right? And just like take those hits and do those things. And you got to conserve legs and energy, and that's why you'll get to the sideline for a couple of breaths of air. But I want to see D. Winters an entire game, like just the entire game. That's what I want to see for the rest of the season.
For the rest of the season, yeah. And I think that I forgot what I was going to say. You literally just said something that
I was just rambling. Is what you really
no. Because I say this all the time that if the young player is just as capable of making the same mistakes that a veteran is making, give me the young player.
All day.
Every time. And that's where we're at. That's where we're at with Devondre Campbell. And we've kind of been there like much of this season, actually. So with where the team is at, it's like, let's do it. Let's get D. Winters these very valuable snaps so that next season we don't need to rely on a Devondre Campbell, and we have a D. Winters that has way more experience and knows what to do in certain situations, right? So hopefully that's what we see going forward. Weston, do I need to ask you who you're voting for this week, or it's pretty obvious, right? You only had one nomination. I think that's who you're voting for.
I wanted there to be no confusion about what my eyes saw yesterday, that Juwan Jennings was the best player on the football field.
Juwan Jennings. Yeah, he's your Week 11 49K Player of the Week. Easiest decision I think we've had to make here all season. And yeah, hopefully hopefully next week we're talking about a win, but just seems a little unlikely.
I always say I'm the like I want this team to win, right? But I promise listeners that I will come and be very positive, even if it's after a loss, if we get more impressions around the younger players on this roster, and then maybe we could talk about that, right? Like we'll talk about who's the player of the game, but Steph, maybe we're like, you know what, when we're giving flowers or doing those things, like how about that guy in his first, full game of action? Didn't look all that bad considering it's the first time he's seen 40 snaps at that speed at the NFL level against a playoff contender in the Green Bay Packers on the road at Lambeau Field. Like that's what I want to be talking about.
Yep. Me too. So let's see what happens this week. This certainly feels like the last shot. I mean, but like for real this time. This comment from earlier from First Kick, what was the word on Brock Purdy's arm? Shoulder soreness day to day this week. And also asks, are you guys moving to Blue Sky soon? I have a Blue Sky account, Steph49K. That's where you can find me on all social media platforms, Steph49K. But I'm not going there full time. I'm everywhere.
Yeah. As you should be.
Everywhere.
Don't spread yourself thin. I'll clear up any confusion right now. I can barely work Twitter. I barely can handle social media. So another one on my resume. I'm just lucky enough that Steph puts up with me and invites me back here on Monday.
We'll be back. We're always here. So make sure that you guys join us next week as well on Monday. Like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I have shows all this week. We'll be talking about plenty more about this team, believe me. But audio listeners, leave a rating, leave a review. Appreciate all of you. The live chat was popping today. Always appreciate your guys' input and what you guys have to say about this team as well. So thank you for that. For now, have a good rest of your Monday, folks. Peace.